You may have heard about CityWorks Expo. For years now, we've been bringing people together to share big ideas for better places. Expo connects innovators across the community and around the globe through an ongoing series of events, conferences, and social media. And our goal is to inspire and support people like you, the ones who have a passion for making their neighborhoods, communities, and cities better places to live, work, and play. Check us out at cityworksxpo.com to learn more. Become a part of the Expo community and share your story. You never know who you will inspire with your big ideas.
I'm here from Cincinnati, Ohio. My name's Kevin Wright. I think I drove the farthest out of the whole group, at least the people I've met so far. No? Richmond, Indiana. All right, I've been to Richmond, Indiana. All right, good. We'll have to talk later. Florida? Okay, I was completely inaccurate in that statement. So I want to start off. My name's Kevin Wright. I'm from Cincinnati. I run a community development corporation in a neighborhood called Walnut Hills. And I want to say a disclaimer. I am not an economist at all. I'm an urban planner and former journalist. I used to work in broadcast journalism. And urban planners and journalists have two things in common. We know a little about a lot, and we don't know a lot about a little. But I'm going to talk about supply and demand today. I'm going to talk, hopefully, give you guys ideas for takeaways to go back to your communities and for you to be able to go back and create demand for your communities. That's a big part of my presentation. I'm going to drill into one example we've used in the neighborhood of Walnut Hills that's really been a momentum changer for us. We believe that across the board, most communities have plans. Raise your hand if your community has a plan. All right, so it's a lot of hands. There are really three big stages to community regeneration in my mind. There's the planning stage. We've all done that. We go into school gymnasiums, we put white paper on the wall, we talk about strengths and weaknesses, and then we go back to our homes. The hope is that those plans lead to demand, that lead to a supply of something, some type of outcome. Usually it means problem properties becoming occupied again, development happening, people investing in your community. What we often don't do is we think about what happens in between the planning process and that point of investment. To us, that is demand creation, and that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit today. So as I mentioned, we are the Walnut Hills Redevelopment Foundation. We recreated ourselves about 4 years ago in the neighborhood of Walnut Hills. We're actually a 40-year organization. I call us a 40-year startup because for about 35 years we developed affordable housing. Then we went defunct for a couple of years, and then we reinvented ourselves. I started with the organization about 4 years ago. It was just me with a laptop computer working out of coffee shops. We now have a staff of 5, and we're doing a lot of big things in the neighborhood. We do everything from, we're first and foremost a real estate developer, so we're a nonprofit real estate developer, but we consider ourselves a comprehensive community development corporation, so we do the little stuff as well. We do workforce development, we do public health work, we do youth engagement, safety, et cetera. Walnut Hills, I want to give you a little glimpse into Walnut Hills. It is a very urban neighborhood. It's right up the hill from downtown Cincinnati, and this is some images from downtown, which is doing very well. It's about 75% African American. It used to be known as the city's second downtown. It's experienced the same narrative that many urban communities have experienced. About the last half century, it's received virtually no investment. It's been a place of disinvestment, a place of crime, blight, et cetera. But we had a few dedicated leaders that stuck through and fought, and now we're here today. When you talk about supply and demand, downtown Cincinnati is doing very well. Demand is exceeding supply. So what does that mean? That means prices are going up downtown. That means some of that demand is starting to trickle up the hill into places like Walnut Hills. But 4 years ago, we weren't really ready for it because developers still go through our neighborhood, or did 4 years ago, and saw all of the things that I mentioned and said, why would I invest there? So it became our job to figure out how to convince them to invest there. Here's a picture of Walnut Hills 4 years ago. So that's the then. These are some images that you probably recognize in communities around your city. In fact, I haven't had a chance to go around Roanoke too much, but I was talking to someone last night, and when I described Walnut Hills, he said it was comparable to the old Southwest neighborhood in Roanoke. So I'm hoping to get there before I leave. But as you can see, vacant buildings. The top right picture is bricked up storefronts, rusty air conditioning units sticking out. A lot of facades like that, bricked up, boarded up. We had riots in the late 60s, and at some point people just said, well, why would I keep fixing the broken glass? Let's just board this up. So this is where I was standing 4 years ago. I got the job as the director of the Walnut Hills Redevelopment Foundation. My job was to make this better. And that's a big task, and I know a lot of people across the country are faced with that same task. Maybe not even a paid staff member. Maybe you're just a volunteer in your community, and you're standing there thinking, how am I going to make this work? And this neighborhood had a plan, and the plan called for a vibrant, diverse, healthy commercial corridor. And that was really why we were created, was to bring back that commercial corridor. And so we're standing there looking around, thinking about all the tools in the toolkit and how can we do this. And we used a lot of tools in the toolkit, and I can talk more about that later. But one thing we really recognized was we just have to change the story. We have to start creating demand. The community wants us to bring on a supply of new businesses, better infrastructure, new residents, new tourists, new visitors. How do we create the demand for that? Now, we did believe in the demand. We said to ourselves, there is a pent-up demand for places like this, walkable, historic places with close proximity to jobs. We're a 5-minute bike ride from downtown. We're a 5-minute bike ride from uptown. Those are the 2 biggest job centers in the whole region. So we said, well, let's target a specific outcome. Let's get some of these young professionals who are starting to get priced out of downtown and over the Rhine because it's going so well, and let's figure out how to get them up here to show that if we build it, they will come. So now, here are some images of these same buildings. So you can see the before and the after. So in 4 years, now don't get me wrong, much of the street, the commercial corridor, still looks pretty rough. So I did choose some pictures where changes occurred. But in 4 years, we've gone from nobody even returning our calls to want to invest in the neighborhood to, by the end of this year, about $15 to $20 million in public-private investment in just 2 years. And I want to walk you through one specific example that I think can be tied back to all that investment. And it was a demand creation exercise that we did in an alleyway. So this is the 5 Points Alley. And this is something that, for good or better or for worse, we've become known for in Walnut Hills. It's a very unique space. This picture was taken just about 2 weeks ago with a drone. And I have to say, if you haven't ever flown a drone, you should fly a drone. It's a lot of fun. So you got to get a drone guy. I've got a drone guy now. You got to find somebody who has a drone and start flying around your neighborhood. It's a lot of fun. The 5 Points Alley is a very unique space. But I want to make the argument that every neighborhood has a 5 Points Alley, right? You don't have this because this is really unique, but you have something in your community that you can turn into something that starts to change the story of your neighborhood. The 5 Points Alley is, let's see if I have a laser pointer here. Whoops, what'd I do? There we go. Well, okay. The 5 Points Alley is called the 5 Points Alley because there are 5 alleyways that intersect at a point here on your far left that create this sort of pathway system in the neighborhood that's very unique. The main business corridor is up on the top right, which is where a lot of our development is happening and where we want to see change. We started walking around the business district about 3 years ago because we had serious safety problems. Homicides, drugs, prostitution, pretty much you name it, we had it. We walked down this alleyway and it was one of the most disgusting walks of my life. I mean, we had condoms on the ground, we had needles, we had trash, we had dead animals, we had everything in these alleys. And we knew right away that this was a big source of the problem with crime, and we needed to clean it up. But we also started looking around, and I was with a couple of people, and this whole triangle here, which is fairly large, was fenced in, and it was overgrown. You couldn't even see across it. And we said to ourselves, well, what if we were talking about just cleaning up the alleyways? And these alleys, by the way, are surrounded by almost exclusively all vacant buildings, or were at the time. but it created sort of an outdoor room. And we said, what if we cleaned up the triangle? Maybe it could become a space that people would want to use. So we did a cleanup, which all of you have probably done in your neighborhood at one point. Cleanups are pretty popular. But what we didn't want to do was we didn't want to just have people clean up and then walk away, because we knew the space would become a negative space again. So we filled about a 40-foot dumpster full of anything you can name went in the dumpster. We had a good time, but we wanted to celebrate it. So we came up with this idea. We actually stole it from Detroit, called a pop-up beer garden. And we did a 5-hour cleanup on a Saturday, and then the following Sunday, the next day, we invited all the volunteers back for what we called this pop-up beer garden. And it just had a few key ingredients. Beer, of course. We sold beer, and it was from a local craft brewery. We had music, some local drummers from the neighborhood, and then people. We invited them back. We didn't create a Facebook event. We didn't advertise it on Twitter. We just invited the volunteers back. And it was a hit. About 50 people came, the same people who came to the cleanup. I want to emphasize that we spent virtually no money. In this process, we spent maybe a couple $100. And this is where I want to emphasize that anyone can sort of take on something like this. The buckets are a good story. Right before the event started, we said, oh, shit, where are people going to sit? They're not going to want to stand and talk about, they don't want to stand and drink beer. So we have a local hardware store that's been in business. It's one of the stalwarts of our business district for like 100 years or something, Beck's Hardware. Went down there and we said to Stan Beck, we said, Stan, we need some buckets. And we got some buckets, and they worked out perfectly. Not only are they perfect for people to sit on, they can move around. So people are carrying buckets and, forming circles and talking to their friends and drinking beer. And this got a ton of attention. And it went from, we decided to do 5 cleanups throughout the summer of 2013, May through September. And it became an underground following. And by the second or third beer garden, June, July, we had hundreds and hundreds of people there. And we had easily made back the money that we had spent on the cleanup. It started to get into the news. People started Instagramming, people started tweeting, they started talking about the neighborhood. Developers started to take notice. It was a huge hit. The space was completely embraced. Now, I have a video I was hoping to show. Okay, I think we have it. So before I do that, I've got to preface this with a story. One of our neighborhood business owners, residents, artists, she's all three, had seen a YouTube video where you wrap rubber bands around a watermelon. And if you wrap enough rubber bands around a watermelon, the watermelon explodes. So she said, hey, Kevin, I want to explode a watermelon at the 5 Points Beer Garden. So we made a promo video for the 5 Points Beer Garden kind of around this idea of exploding watermelons. And I want to show you this video because it kind of gives you a sense of the fun, happy atmosphere at these 5 Points Beer Gardens. So here you go. Sound? There we go. So we have a flair for the dramatic in Walnut Hills. So we made a neighborhood resident made the movie for us, and it's sort of like a movie trailer. And the goal was to get people to come to the 5 Points Alley. And the watermelon, exploding watermelon, is something that's pretty simple, but became really popular. And we actually turned it into a fundraiser. And if you bought a beer, you got a rubber band, and you had to go over there and put it on. But you could also buy 5 more rubber bands, and the rubber band, if you paid for rubber bands, it went back into the neighborhood. And it became kind of intense. Like, if you bought a beer, you had to go put a rubber band on it, and if it was like starting to squeeze, you were pretty scared to go over there because it actually was kind of dangerous. This slide is missing a few images for some reason, but what's interesting is what happened next, and I want to walk you guys through that. We saw this as an opportunity, so we wanted to capitalize on it. So we partnered with the design and architecture studio at University of Cincinnati to start building prototypes for the space. We started thinking about how to take it from temporary pop-up to permanent. And so the second year of the beer gardens, we partnered with University of Cincinnati, and they built prototypes. They built, you can see one of the seats here that they built with lights coming out of it. They built a kiosk. They built a temporary stage. And we began sort of testing how people reacted to the space. So we used the beer gardens as a way to see what people wanted in the community, what they wanted in the space. We would move the kiosk around. We would move the seats around. And the second year, the beer gardens were of even bigger success. You can see here we built a stage, so we'd have live music. We had some interactive games. We built some canopies for shade because we realized portions of the space would get too hot. And we kept testing ideas throughout the beer garden. So these are some images from year 2, which was 2014. We then started thinking about the big vision. And we partnered with a company called MKSK out of Cincinnati. It's an urban landscaping firm and design firm. And they began sort of giving us some real plans for this space. And then the kicker was this was getting so much attention that the city of Cincinnati, the Hale Foundation, which is a foundation in Cincinnati, and Procter & Gamble, one of the biggest companies in the world, gave us money to turn the space into a permanent park. So I want to repeat that. Procter & Gamble, who couldn't have cared less, for the most part, about a neighborhood like Walnut Hills, started to pay attention. And that was a big moment for us. Now, they only gave $50,000, which is a lot of money. Not a lot for Procter & Gamble, but $50,000 was a lot to us, and it really helped us take that next step. And we can't thank them enough. So these are some of the examples of lighting, seating, et cetera. We've started to paint murals in the space. And just 2 weeks ago, we broke ground. And on Monday, we're starting construction. So it's going from a couple $100 to rent a dumpster, buy some beer, to almost $200,000 of investment in the space. And construction starts on Monday. So that was a big deal for us, and it completely changed the momentum. I want to talk about how it created demand really quickly and what was happening elsewhere while this was happening. And I think it's tied directly back to this event. This is Ron Roblando on the left, and this is Mike on the right. Both of these guys will say that they opened businesses in Walnut Hills in the last 2 years because of the 5 Points Beer Gardens. Ron came to a cleanup. He's a family guy. He lives in the neighborhood adjacent to Walnut Hills. He came to a cleanup. He loved it. He loved the diversity of the neighborhood. He loved the character of the neighborhood. He knew one of the building owners on the 5 Points alley, and just 2 weeks ago, he finally opened a coffee house/bar that opens up onto the alley. His investment in the space is tied directly back to what we did. Again, demand and supply. Now, a big part of this presentation is talking about not only how you create supply through demand creation, but also how you influence it. That you can say, if you as a community take control of what the demand looks like in your neighborhood, it will influence what the supply looks like. You'll get the business owners you want. So we have Ron, who first and foremost is opening a business in our community because he loves our community. He's not a national retailer. He's not out just to make a buck. Of course, he wants to make money selling coffee, but his doors are wide open. So he opened 2 weeks ago. He did a soft opening only for community members. He wants community members to come in first, get to know him before the neighborhood really explodes. Mike was the same way. He had a wood-fired pizza cart. It was very popular. And we happened to own the oldest standing firehouse in the city, which was right off the 5 Points. So we redeveloped it. He moved his business in. He's been open a year. He's doing very well. We also, in the meantime, have a $10 million project under construction that I really don't think would have happened as quickly or at all had we not taken control of the story of our neighborhood. They saw, the developers who are doing this project, which is very, very large, very catalytic, saw a demand. Maybe before we showed it to them, they believed in it, These are guys who believe in the urban expansion that's happening across the country. But all we did was throw some kegs into an alley and some live music, and these young professionals just flocked to the area. So that forced them to see that this was a place to invest in now, not later. And before I end, I want to talk about going beyond the 5 Points Beer Garden. So we don't apologize about the fact that the outcome we wanted of the 5 Points Beer Garden was development growth, new businesses, new residents. But as I said at the beginning, if you have a plan in your neighborhood, that could look like a lot of different outcomes. It might not be development. It might be a walking path. It might be a grocery store. I could go on and on. It might be a rec center. It might be a YMCA. We've realized that we've done this in 2 or 3 other spaces in the neighborhood, and your outcome can be whatever you want it to be. We have this picture on the right is of the St. James Pocket Park, which is known as, before that, as the St. James Cut-Through. It's right by our grocery store in our neighborhood business district. It's a vacated street that was turned into a concrete plaza in the 1980s. It was never activated, so it became a place of crime. There's been 3 homicides there in the last 4 years just since I've been there. So we bought the property and we've taken it over and we've been painting it. We used a pattern from a local artist to paint the ground. And our outcome here isn't the same outcome as the 5 Points Beer Garden. We're creating demand for something else because of the 5 Points Beer Garden, we have momentum. Now we want to figure out how we can make the development and change in Walnut Hills inclusive and equitable. And so we brought in a group in Cincinnati called Mortar, these 3 guys on the left, who are doing non-traditional entrepreneurship training. And they're helping us activate the St. James Pocket Park into a market with an adjacent vacant 10,000 square foot formerly Dollar City building that they're going to do a holiday pop-up market in that's going to be purely for mostly African-American neighborhood entrepreneurs. And the hope is that creates a demand for a supply of spaces that can come online that allow the growth of the community to look like the community. We also did 2 other things. We wanted to engage people where they were, so we did something called the 2-cent coffee shop, which pops up on occasional corners from time to time. And the idea is we just brew a cup of coffee for people, and you can literally give us 2 pennies for a cup of coffee, or you can give us your 2 cents on how the neighborhood should change. So again, that's activating street corners and engaging people where they are. The other really good example, which I don't have time to go into in depth, is we do have a grocery store, as I mentioned, and we're lucky because there's a lot of food deserts in Cincinnati. But our grocery store is constantly threatening to leave. And when I first started, we did a survey with the residents of why don't you shop at the grocery store? Because the grocery store is saying they're going to leave because they don't make money. We asked people, why don't you shop there? They said, well, I don't feel safe, and they don't stock the food that I want to buy. They don't have organic produce. They don't have this and that. So we created something called Buy 25 Tuesdays. Again, sort of a demand creator for a specific outcome. The outcome was saving the grocery store. Buy 25 Tuesdays was on the 2nd and 4th Tuesday of every month. The idea was simple. We throw an event in the parking lot, which makes it feel safe, helps the shopper feel safer. The shopper has to come and spend $25 in the store. Now, when you're grocery shopping, it's pretty easy to spend $25. You know, you can buy paper, even if they don't have what you need, you can buy paper towels, toilet paper, Windex, on and on. The idea was, though, they come with their full grocery list, they spend $25. On the way out, they talk to the manager, they give them the grocery list of what they couldn't buy in the store. This completely changed the outcome of the grocery model in Walnut Hills. They went from closing their doors within a year to renewing their lease. They added an organic produce section to their store. And the shoppers who had this negative perception of the experience of the store, once they got in there, realized it wasn't so bad, and it increased the amount of revenue that the grocery collects. So with that, I want to say thank you for allowing me to speak. There's a website called activateplace.com. A partner of mine, Joe Nickel, who works for the company MKSK that I mentioned earlier, we've created a PDF called 5 Ways to Activate Your Neighborhood This Weekend. It takes you through a step-by-step process of how to do what we did in the 5 Points Alley. We just recently applied for a grant to expand on that and create something called the Neighborhood Ownership Manual, which will be a longer version of that. But for now, you guys should go to the website, check it out, see if it helps, give us feedback. And I do have a few hard copies I can hand out as well, but not nearly enough. So thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Before you head off, are there any questions? And Kevin, actually, I have one, but
Okay.
Are there any questions from the audience? Yep, come to the mic.
Kevin, do you ever worry that making some things that are permanent or that are pop-ups, that making them permanent will halt the momentum or create a new kind of vibe around these really interesting places?
Absolutely. Somebody yesterday, actually I think it was Josh who's walking in right now, talked about the negative aspects of having too much money. And I don't think we would have ever done the 5 Points Alley had we been an organization with millions of dollars. I'll take that back to the bucket idea. Somebody came up to me who owns a really popular business in Cincinnati and said, you know, one of my biggest regrets last summer was not coming to the 5 Points Beer Garden. And I said, oh, that's great to hear, but you should come next time. And he said, did I see people sitting on buckets? And I said, yeah. And I thought it was going to be a negative reaction, but his reaction was, that's awesome. That's incredible. He was like, too many people in this city are waiting for the big top-down approach, waiting for the big money. He said, I love the people who have no money are doing the most creative things. So when we worked with MKSK to redesign the space, we were very worried about it. And we're not doing much. We're resurfacing it, we're adding some permanent seating, and we're adding lighting. So some kind of key components that are missing from being able to use the space day and night. But we're keeping a lot of the trees, even though they're fairly unhealthy, just because it creates a canopy in the space, and we didn't want to take those down. And our hope is that we don't have to continue programming it for much longer. That guys like Ron with the coffee house and Mike from Fireside, and as more businesses come open, they own it. And it becomes sort of an economic development tool for them.
All right, great. I think there's a question right here.
Hi, Kevin. My name is Princess, and I'm a Roanoke resident. I've grown up here most of my life. And I think one of the neighborhoods that you should probably see before you leave is the West End. I grew up there, and it reminds me a lot of Walnut Hills. And right now, the West End is going through, it's getting a lot of funds, a lot of development, a lot of, and so my question is, how do you, can you elaborate a little more on how you are engaging the people who have no other choice but to live in Walnut Hills? I mean, I see you bringing in people, but can you elaborate a little more on that?
Yes, that's a great question. Yeah. So the 5 Points Beer Garden had some unintended outcomes. We didn't think it would explode, watermelon pun intended, the way that it did as quickly as it did. And it was very, most of the people who came to it early on were outsiders. They were white, they were young, they weren't reflective of the community. But looking back on it, that's not necessarily a negative in that particular instance, because we really felt like the neighborhood needed a shot in the arm. And we needed to come in quick and sort of give it that shot in the arm, get people talking about it, get people excited about it. When I think about gentrification, I think about sort of a neighborhood trajectory going like this. At some point, you want to intervene with policies or engagement strategies that allow it to continue to rise, but to make sure that it's inclusive. So I would say about a year and a half ago, we kept doing the beer gardens, but that's when we started doing St. James Pocket Park. We started doing other engagement strategies as well, and we're starting to have success. We also moved our office. Our office is in an old instant tax service storefront now, which is right across from the Kroger and the CVS, and so we get a lot of walk-in traffic, and we do things on the sidewalk, and our strategy is really around now thinking differently about outcomes. We think that we're now at a point where it's going like this, and developers are knocking on our door as opposed to us knocking on theirs. So then how do we make sure that trajectory stays in the same path, but add affordable housing into it, make sure people are engaged in the process? So we're still learning, and that's why I'm here. Hopefully to hear more ideas around it, but it's just really kind of a change in strategy in terms of what do we want out of some of these placemaking strategies.
That was actually my question, engagement strategies with the existing community. I think we have a question over here.
Hey, how you doing? My name is Macklin Mosley. I actually had the same question that they both had. And I'm glad you mentioned the word gentrification because it happens a lot in communities. Especially I have friends in DC and other like cities who have said like this looked like this, they came in, and now it looks like this. So while it looks great, people are gone. I guess I want to ask you, one thing I would say is props to you because when I was, me and my sister were discussing it while you were giving your presentation about how you did have people in the community actually engaged and involved that were from that community. So props to you guys for doing that. I think that's really great. I want to know one thing, for you, have you gotten the community, I know you said like you brought people in, even people that may have looked like those people in the community, but have you gotten people in the community like really excited? Have you gotten people in the community that came with ideas, that came with solutions for their community? And how have you handled friction? Because I know you've had it.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a lot of questions in that question. No, it's okay. Yeah, there is friction. We were created by the Community Council. And we have something called the Walnut Hills Working Group, which is members of the Community Council, 2 members from the Community Council, 2 members from the Redevelopment Foundation, and 2 members from the business group. We force ourselves to meet once a month, and we don't make decisions unless we make them together. That room is very diverse. It's full of longtime residents and new residents, and longtime business owners and new business owners. And so that forces collaboration. We also have forced collaboration amongst all our boards. So the president of the area council was my board president for a long time. And so it wasn't just my perspective, which it shouldn't be, in the room. So there is friction. I don't think you can get around friction. I think when places change, some people get fearful. We just are constantly trying to have spaces where they can come in and talk about it and talk about that fear. We're not going to be offended by it. We want them to talk about it. We want to talk it out. And we're trying to do that more and more. I think the takeaway when it comes to gentrification from my presentation is don't just sit there, right? So you've created a plan. I think I'm 100% convinced there's so many communities out there who've created a plan and they think they're done. And they think the development's just going to come happen that fits the plan. But is there one specific thing in the plan that is the most important thing? For us, it was the business district. Get out there and do something like this to make it happen. And if you're involved and people are involved, it will shape out like the people who are involved. And that's what we mean by influencing supply, right? That Ron, who's Filipino, a person of color, wanted to open a coffee shop in Walnut Hills because it's a neighborhood who would embrace him. In our $10 million real estate project, our first tenant is an African-American-owned barbecue restaurant. And I walked around with him, tried to sell him on the big vision of the neighborhood like I do, and he said, I don't care about the big vision. I like the way it is now. Worst case scenario is I'm a black-owned barbecue joint in a black neighborhood, right? So he's our first tenant, and he ties that right back to the fact that it's a community-based approach. So I really do think if you're intentionally influencing that demand, it will influence the supply. Now, I'm not saying it's going to cure gentrification. I think check back with me in like 3 or 4 years because we have a ton of investment that's about to occur, and it worries me. How do we make sure that this character remains in the neighborhood that exists right now? So we're learning as we go, and we're just trying to do our best. I appreciate the question.
I think one more.
Can you comment on the minority pop-up business idea that you briefly mentioned?
Yeah, you guys should invite Mortar next year. They're 3 young, dynamic guys who have become some of my best friends lately. They take, now I hope I don't say anything inaccurate about them, but they take basically the co-starter approach, a 9-week course, and they do a 9-week course training what they call non-traditional entrepreneurs. The common denominator across their class participants is low income, but they try to focus on African American. It's about, I think they've received about a 60 to 70% African American rate through that. They've been doing it in Over the Rhine. They've held a couple classes. They're called Brick and Mortar. Mortar is their class, the 9-week class. Brick is a pop-up shop in Over the Rhine. So their graduates can have the pop-up shop to test their business idea to see how it works, particularly during the holiday season. They intervened in Over the Rhine a little bit too late. It was sort of already up here, starting to really become a popular place. We invited them up at, I think, the right time, and they're going to teach a 9-week course in our class. They can afford to teach 15 people. They received, I think, about 50 applications from Walnut Hills residents to take the course. We're helping to pay for it. They're going to teach the course, and then the really interesting part is this Dollar City St. James Pocket Park concept. It's a 10,000 square foot space. We've been inviting community members into this space. We cleaned it out. We own it, and we've been asking them what they want to see there, and it's going to be a massive holiday pop-up market beginning on Black Friday of this year. That's going to go through the holiday season. And it's going to have an event-based approach, lots of stuff going on in the space, but it's going to have some of those non-traditional entrepreneurs who oftentimes aren't engaged in community, whether it's like the grandma who lives on a side street who makes quilts, or the artist who paints. They're all going to be able to sort of have a booth in the space, and it's going to achieve a few things for us. It's going to engage the community. It's going to highlight some entrepreneurs in the neighborhood, and it's also going to activate a portion of our business district that is currently not activated and has safety issues and so on.
Okay. Kevin, thank you so
Thank you.
much. Give him a round of applause.